David has asked me to present a bit about some of the work VCOS has been doing over the last few years, particularly a major report we brought out a couple of years ago called Creating Accessible Journeys. And VCOS is the Victorian Council of Social Service. So we're the peak body, the umbrella group for community services in Victoria. And our role is to advocate for community services and people experiencing disadvantage in Victoria. And something we've been doing for about the past 10 years is actually engaging more and more in issues around transport. It's something we don't have. We didn't have a history before. We talk generally more about, the provision of social services, but increasingly we've realised that transport is an essential service as well. And transport, if people don't have transport access to the places they need to be in their lives, then they can't do the things that they need to do. So it's become very clear to us that transport is a space that we need to be in. It's an issue that we need to be talking about. And so we've done quite a bit of work on some of these issues, particularly around accessible transport. A few years ago we brought out a report called the Accessible Transport Watch Project, which did a survey of over 200 people with disabilities and older people, and identified a whole raft of different issues across the state that were creating barriers for transport use. And I'll talk about some of those in the presentation. We also did quite a big campaign about 5 years ago when the government proposed to change the multi-purpose taxi program and cut it basically and reduce people's eligibility for subsidised fares. And we were quite successful in that the government didn't about face and decided not to cut the program to the extent they were proposing. As I've mentioned, we also produced, coming out of those two pieces of work, the Creating Accessible Journeys report. I'll give you a bit more detail about that later. You may also all be aware that the Victorian government just last week responded to the Victorian taxi industry inquiry. And we're actually extremely pleased with the government's response, particularly around some of their improvements to accessibility of the taxi services. We've been working for a couple of years now with the inquiry and held a number of very large forums in Melbourne to talk around the issues and to actually ensure that accessibility needs of the taxi fleet were part of that conversation, and it's not just about business people and tourists, but taxi use is actually an essential service for many people who have no other options, partially because the public transport system doesn't work for them. And finally, I'll tell you a bit about the All Aboard network. The All Aboard network is a network that I facilitate, and it brings together a number of community organisations, individual advocates and local government officers to talk about accessible transport and how we work together to improve that across the state. So that was our follow-up report, and it's quite a detailed report if you like some late night reading. But some of the key ideas that we came to the conclusion was actually about understanding accessibility across the entire system. Firstly, there's often a view, both within government and sometimes in the community, that improving the accessibility of public transport is for a very small group of people. This is something for just this small group of people, and really, most people don't really require that. And part of the conclusion we came to was actually understanding that improving accessibility isn't just for a small group of people, but actually everybody in the community benefits when we improve the accessibility of public transport. Partially because we need to understand that people have whole lives, that they're children, adults, and they become older, and at some point in everybody's life they're likely to need accessible transport. But also we do things, we carry luggage, we have shopping trolleys, we have a whole bunch of different ways that we use public transport, that accessibility helps all of us. Having, displays at stops helps all of us. It's not just for people who are deaf. Having announcements at stops and train stations helps everybody. It's not just for people who are vision impaired. So improving the accessibility across the board, in fact, helps all passengers, and it's not merely addressing a need for a small group of people, although the needs of that group to be included are also part of the importance of the issue. The other thing I guess we talk quite a lot about to government is trying to move from just upgrading bits of the system kind of randomly. What we see, and many of you have already kind of discussed some of these issues, is that quite often you'll have a low floor tram but no platform stop to get onto it. Sometimes they'll build a whole row of platform stops, but there are no low floor trams that go to those stops. You'll see things like where they will build lifts in a new train station, but build no ramp. So if the lift fails, then people can't get on or off the train. We see things, and I think there's a few in Boroondara, where they'll build a brand new spanking bus stop, but it isn't necessarily connected to the footpath, so you can't actually get onto it or off it. So some of this thing about understanding that accessibility is required from door to door. It's not just required in one piece of infrastructure or at one place, but in fact, in order to get an access outcome, in order to actually successfully improve the accessibility of transport, we need to ensure that the whole journey is accessible, not just a particular piece of infrastructure or a particular vehicle. Now, you may or may not be aware that the federal government has legislated a thing called the Disability Standards for Accessible Public Transport as part of the Disability Discrimination Act. And in that legislation, there are a set of targets about the dates at which state governments and transport operators are required to improve the accessibility of their public transport. So last December 2012, all of the public transport system was supposed to be 55% compliant. Now these are the latest figures I have from the state government, and you'll see that actually only in 3 cases have we met those targets.
So can I just ask you what's blue, what's brown?
Sorry, yeah, the presentation's a little bit tiny, but blue is vehicles, and brown is infrastructure, so stops and stations. And going from left to right, we have the metropolitan train system. We have the tram system, which is quite obviously the worst of the lot. We have the metropolitan bus system. We have the regional train system, so V-line trains. And then we have the regional bus system.
Thanks.
And in nearly all cases, nowhere is the infrastructure met the targets. And in terms of vehicles, both the regional bus system and the tram system has not met the targets either. Of course, there is some debate around whether, in fact, even those figures are entirely valid. I think there's a lot of debate about what the department thinks is accessible and what people experience as accessible. But we'll keep moving. So I've mentioned a bit about the whole of journey approach. One of my favourites, it's not very clear, this second image is actually from a platform stop at the bottom of the ramp. And if you look across the street, this is on Collins Street, you'll see that at the bottom of the ramp, if you cross the road, you hit a gutter. And it's kind of that kind of evidence that where people haven't thought about how people actually use the infrastructure. So, you have a brand new platform stop, a ramp, you get to the bottom of it and you actually can't cross the road. Similarly, this last image is a bus stop, brand new smart bus stop, and as you can see, it's completely surrounded by, grass and lawn and stuff. So we continue to have this disconnect within the state government that they concentrate on pieces of the system, they don't concentrate on how to connect it together. We'll keep So I did want to give you, I guess, a bit of a rundown. I'm not sure how much you've had already, but on some of the features that do exist on public transport. So very quickly, we do have low floor trams and buses. And particularly the buses are quite well advanced in the number of low floor buses. Most buses in the metropolitan area are now low floor. In some of the regional cities they're 100%, I think in Bendigo and Geelong, 100% low floor buses. We do have both the super stops, and they've also brought in a new type of level access tram stop called the Easy Access Stop. You may have seen them on Bridge Road. There's a few brand new ones there, or on MacArthur Street at Parliament Station in the city. So it's actually a design where they basically raise the road surface so the cars can still go over, but creates a ledge so that you have level access to a low floor tram. So on the train system, of course, there are boarding ramps deployed. There are ramps and/or lifts at most metro stations, although at many stations they're old ramps and are actually far steeper than is now required by the disability standards. There are audible announcements on trains. Some of the trams, and recently one of the models of tram they managed to refit to have audible announcements at each stop. And the smart buses also have audible announcements as well. We have audible timetables at train stations and on some tram stops and some smart bus stops. Tactile ground surface indicators, so people are aware of the tactile pass. Yeah. At many stations and stops, and we also have a fleet of wheelchair accessible taxis. Also, in terms of ticketing and concessions, so there are quite a number of both free travel passes and concessions available to people with disabilities and older people. The Access Travel Pass is for people who have difficulty using the MyKey system. So if you have difficulty in being able to touch on and off, or indeed if you have an intellectual disability and you're unable to kind of remember to touch on and off, or you don't have the capability to understand monetary transactions, you can get an Access Travel Pass, which allows you free use of the system and you don't need to touch on and off. There is also a wheelchair and scooter travel pass, so if you require a wheelchair or a scooter to get around, you can get a free travel pass from Public Transport Victoria, which entitles you to free travel across the state on all forms of public transport.
So just about that, and I'm sorry to be asking you, but isn't there a lot of paperwork involved?
There is.
In that? Okay, because I have MS and I'm not able to write, which is something that I'm quite sure that I'm not the only person with disability that has lost the use or their ability to write. Is there an alternative for people such as myself?
You should be able to make a verbal application. You should be able to call the pass office and say, look, I'm unable to fill out a form, and I'd like some assistance doing that over the phone. The only other thing is you may have to arrange for some other form of assistance to find someone to do that. The other thing is that the wheelchair and scooter travel pass actually requires a medical thing. So they would suggest, I suspect, that you ask your
GP to fill out some paperwork.
Yeah, either GP or an occupational therapist, or it's any. Well, there's a whole set of health professionals that can do that. Yeah. But it does require a health professional to sign up on the form.
And so where do you get that from? Where do you apply?
So you can download the forms from the Public Transport Victoria website.
There we go, thank you.
Or you can call their call centre and they'll direct you. There's also a vision impaired travel pass. So if you are legally blind, I'm not entirely sure what the cutoff is there, but if you're legally blind to get free transport. Free transport for companions, so anyone holding a companion card travels free with the person they're travelling with. For seniors and pensioners, and that includes DSP pensioners, they're entitled to a weekend free travel pass. So if you get the seniors Myki, that will be loaded onto it if you apply through the central office. And there's also a Sunday travel pass for anyone who receives the carer's payment. That one's for. And then the general concession card also works for seniors and pensioners, as well as anyone with a healthcare card. And the seniors card in particular, if you get a seniors Myki, it has some additional benefits, including a daily cap on your expenditure. And you also are entitled to free travel vouchers across the state. I think you get 4 of them a year. And finally, if you do have permanent mobility issues or you are vision impaired, you're entitled to the multi-purpose taxi program, which is a subsidised taxi program, which gives you basically cheap taxi fares. Okay. The other thing I'll just point out is that there are a number of complaints bodies across the system. If there are issues with the accessibility of public transport, there are a number of different places to go, and it is a little bit complicated, but you can approach the operator themselves. So, for example, Metro Trains, Yarra Trams, the local bus company. Public Transport Victoria is the new, shiny new central government agency that runs the public transport system. The Minister, you can go direct to the Minister. Quite a lot of people go direct to the Minister, and that does kind of have some political impact at times. The Public Transport Ombudsman. So there is an ombudsman for the public transport system. They're able to take complaints, and they're also quite good that where they have jurisdiction, and that's sometimes an issue, they have quite a lot of power to make operators do things and indeed issue fines to operators if they don't fix the complaint. And also the various, both the state level and the national level human rights commissions, and particularly around some of the infrastructure issues with public transport. If they are not meeting the disability standards for accessible public transport, there is the capacity to take complaint to those bodies.
A long process.
But it's a long process, and it's not really the ideal way to enforce a systemic issue by requiring kind of the most vulnerable person in that chain to be the policeman. So because we're working with discrimination law, and that is the, I guess, basis on which the federal government intervenes in what is often considered a state government matter, the mechanism is through the Discrimination Act. But certainly we have advocated that that should change, that there should be alternative mechanisms. The suggestion that came out of the last review, which has not been implemented by the federal government, was that the Australian Human Rights Commission should have the power to take complaints on its own behalf or take representative complaints to the federal court, so that it doesn't solely rely on individual cases. And indeed, I think, we don't require, we don't say that road safety needs to be enforced only by motorists taking individual complaints about another motorist. Why is it different in this case? Should not the government take the responsibility themselves to enforce their own legislation? And we've made that point, and we'll continue making that point around this issue.
And then change of federal government possibly this year, that could all kind of change as well.
I doubt that the standards will change, but certainly that the outcome of the current review will be presented to whomever is in government at the federal level after September.
I just got one more comment. I think this lady made a really valid point about not being able to fill in an application, and myself, I'm an occupational therapist who works at a rehab centre, and even for people a lot of people missed out on getting their seniors cards sent to them and have had no way, because they don't have access to the internet, of downloading the form. speaking to Mikey on the telephones is largely unhelpful. I've spent a lot of time filling out applications for them, and I don't think, again, for a vulnerable population, that that's acceptable, that they should have to muddle their way through the internet to try and find, or sit on a phone for hours trying to get a senior's card, or even, as you were saying, just to get the concession cards. So I think that needs to be sort of taken seriously as well, about how people, the ease of access to these applications.
I completely agree.
And just the ease of the terminology and the writing with the instructions as well.
Yeah, look, and we continue to make that point to the government as well. Recently they did redo the applications forms for the multi-purpose taxi program,
Right. Yeah.
and they're better, and they don't require you to tell your entire life story and things like that. So they're much shorter and in a sense much easier to fill out. The public transport side is, Mikey has a lot on their plate, if you like. It's very hard, and we continue to talk about, I mean, even just, I showed you, there it is, the vast number of, that's only a subset. There are 17 different free travel passes. The commitments the state government has made around accessibility include that they've said that all new train stations will have ramp access. So you may be aware that a number of new train stations have been built in the last few years that actually don't have ramps on them. And they've now said that all new ones will, in the future, will have ramp access on them, with the possible exception of underground stations where you actually, if you put a ramp down to it, it would be about 2 kilometres long. So with that exception, they will be putting ramps on stations. They're also looking at doing an entire route upgrade of Route 96. So they're actually putting together plans right now to say that every tram stop on that route, which is 100% low floor trams, will have an accessible tram stop. So 96, St Kilda to Brunswick East.
Okay.
So it's the Nicholson Street tram.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're looking to continue to do that on other routes in the future, where that instead of doing one stop here and there, they actually go, let's do the lot. And we're certainly quite supportive of that approach.
And research shows that's a busy line.
Sorry, that's
research shows that that's a very high traffic line.
Yeah, it's actually one of the highest.
Okay.
Yeah. 50 new trams, 50 new low floor trams are on order to be delivered over the next 5 years. They were supposed to start being delivered at the end of last year, but there's been a hold up. But we certainly are expecting, and it is good to see that there is continued investment in low floor trams.
Just I'm no tram expert, like I imagine most of the people here, but how many trams would there be in operation across Melbourne?
There are about 450 trams in operation, and of those, about a quarter are low floor at the moment. So about 100, 120 are low floor.
Sorry to be ignorant, but is low floor just slightly lower than the normal tram? What does low floor mean?
So low floor is low enough, so it means there are no steps on the tram, so you don't, there are no internal
tram
steps.
For a while, so are there steps on normal tram?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no steps on the tram, and it's low enough to meet platform stop.
Yeah, so it's like the smart buses, that kind of thing.
Well, the smart buses still have a ramp that deploys. Whereas
you can just drive straight on, and there's no gap. Okay.
Yeah, the bit about the gap is an interesting one, but we'll come back.
Okay. All right.
Unfortunately, I guess our concern about the new trams is they actually have internal ramps.
Oh, great.
Which maybe a bit tricky for some.
So those 50 new trams or current trams in operation?
No, all the current low floor trams don't have internal ramps. But these new 50
Like this, sort of like the smart bus.
will have internal ramps, so you have to, drive up the tram.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's fine if you've got perfect ability manoeuvring your wheelchair and scooter, but yeah, again, that's very short-sighted.
Does
Yeah.
that cover the gap? Okay, the gap. The gap.
I
A
suspect
different
it
issue.
doesn't.
Okay.
Well, and the gap is that really none of our tram system meets the GDA standard for the gap.
Yeah, so fully.
Sorry.
Now, they
Sorry.
are, what they have committed to do, and they are looking at, is that they're developing there's kind of these rubber things that they can stick on the stop that will collapse and actually help bridge the gap. So that's currently what they're looking at putting in to try and improve the gap closing. However, yes,
I
there's
carry my own
a
ramp.
long debate about how to minimise that gap.
That's just a cracker. Sorry.
So, and yeah, I mean, were they thinking that they'd get the driver to pop out and put the ramp on? Because it's always great when you hop on traffic.
Can we talk to the driver? So what is the reason?
Oh no, people always talk to me. They think that I'm intellectually disabled. They always, and I'm like, yeah, thanks. I've got my makeup, but you know.
Okay.
Could you just tell us how does Victoria compare to the other states in as far as funds for disability transport access and so forth? How are we keeping up against, say, New South Wales or Queensland?
Look, it's very hard to pull apart in a sense, because quite often a lot of the accessibility expenditure will be incorporated in other expenditure. So, I find it a bit, it's been put to me that the government spent billions of dollars on buying new trams, and you're like, well, they needed to buy new trams anyway. The extra expenditure to make them low floor is really what we should be looking at, but they don't kind of pull that out and separate it.
There's so much disconnect, isn't there?
So it's a very hard question to answer in a sense, because a lot of the accessibility features will be rolled up in other projects. So how much they're expending on accessibility versus just building new stuff or buying new things is a hard question to pull apart.
Which state gets it right? Are there all disconnects in each state?
There are all disconnects, and look, Victoria does okay, to be frank. I think Western Australia is an interesting case study, but part of the thing, I guess, for them is that they've got new train systems. They're building new lines and doing all sorts of things, so they've kind of they can build it in from the beginning, whereas Victoria and New South Wales in particular have very old systems that need to be retrofitted, which makes it much more difficult. The one last thing I will remind you of, I guess, is that I do facilitate the All Aboard Action Network. If anyone is interested, I guess, in being a little bit more engaged and coming along and talking to others who are working in this space, please give myself or David your contact details, and I can add you to the contact list. We meet in the city.
Okay.
At VPOS, so in the VPOS boardroom.
And is that wheelchair friendly?
It is possible.
Not the one
But
Certainly about half the members of that group use mobility aids. So yes.
yeah, I suppose so. So just scoping it out and so forth.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions for Llewellyn?
Just want to ask, in upgrading things, the low-floor buses, yes, you can get into them, but there's no safety features once you get into them.
Sure.
There's no straps across you or poles to hang on to. And I've only been on one once, and it was a frightening experience because, brakes or not, you get moved around so much.
And there's certainly, so yes, we actually did a forum about 18 months ago on buses in particular, and have documented a number of those concerns for government, and we are trying to get them to incorporate them into their bus purchasing rules. But yes, and there's a number of things. I guess there's two parts to that question, because in fact the disability standard separates out taxis and coaches on the one hand from kind of city buses on the other, because the idea is that certainly in things that travel fast, things that are going 100 kilometres down a highway, like a taxi or a coach, there is a higher standard for safety than there is on a normal route bus, which generally only goes 30 or 40 k's an hour.
Well, we'd like to.
It does jerk you around.
But there are a number of safety features that other jurisdictions have put into place, like sidebars or what they call ironing boards, but it's a backrest that you can actually, that's spring-loaded, so if you back into it and lock your wheelchair, it will create some resistance against it. As well as other jurisdictions also have rules that require the seat to be forward-facing, not backwards-facing, because I know a number of people find that quite confronting to have to sit there and be on show for the rest of the bus.
The train is better.
Sorry?
The train travel for people in a wheelchair better.
You still jerk around, but it's sorry, I'm answering that, sorry.
Yeah, no, please.
You still jerk around, but it's a smaller area, so you don't feel as though you're going to go flying somewhere, because when you're in a taxi it locks in your wheelchair, so you have less
I think you're right with the movement. You have to be able to walk those steps to sit down. I said that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's another legislation which strikes me as kind of stupid.
Well, for me, I just ask people to move.
Yeah.
Because, hello, there's a sign, can you not read? And that's also, if you have that ability and that, and you feel comfortable enough to do that, that's one option. But the train is okay. The bus, for me, I find is the braking skills of the bus driver. If he's driving like a nutcase and slamming on the brakes, then you feel more uncomfortable. But if he's braking at a better pace, then you don't jerk around as much. But it's still great to have that transport than not to have it.
Yeah.
Mine, in my question, well not my question, my comment is also about sort of the setup of the trams. On the low floor trams, the priority seating actually requires people to get up a step and down a step. One of the priority seating, the one that's closer to the door, has a buzzer and the marquee card, very accessible. The other one doesn't. And on the older style trams, one of the priority seating doesn't actually have any buzzer, any rail, or except the really high ones, which sometimes it's really difficult for people to extend their arm that high. There's actually nothing for them to hold on to, and whilst people can request assistance to push the buzzer and scan their marquee, some people don't feel confident doing that, and I just wondered whether there's any plans to look at that in the future in terms of access.
Okay, so certainly my understanding and what PTD have told me is that with the new trams, they've consulted quite extensively on the internal fit-out about where priority seating is. And I think they actually changed a few things, because I think they had a similar arrangement where the priority seating was kind of up on an elevated platform. And that's no longer the case. In terms of the existing trams, obviously retrofitting's expensive. However, Yarra Trams has been doing some experiments with retrofitting some of the trams, mostly, to be frank, so they can squish more people in them and take out some of the seats. And you'll note that there are quite a number of different designs to the internal trams, including that many of them have what they call the bum rests, basically.
Oh, is that what?
in order to, and that's, you know, transparently, so that you can fit more people in a vehicle if they're standing up than you can if they're sitting down.
The pinball effect.
So there are kind of ongoing looking at the internal fit out of the older trams, but really it comes back to how much more capacity can they squeeze out a tram, and if that's kind of, if the money adds up, then they might put some money into refitting them. Is the short answer.
Okay, and finally we have David Williamson, our Metro Access Officer at City of Boroondara, who will provide a brief overview of the Metro Access program and how you can access it before we finish today.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so I've got some good news and bad news. Good news is that we're almost done. I just want to tell you about some of the access opportunities there are in Boroondara and some of the council things. Bad news is it's freezing outside, so I just went outside to move my car.
It's not rain.
It's not far off, all right. So we'll try to make this as brief as possible. So over the course of today, we've talked about a few things. You know, the theme of the day has been accessibility and access for all. There's a number of things at council that we have in terms of getting involved and being involved in access issues. The Metro Access position, there's one of me. In other words, in all the local government areas in Victoria, so there's 55 Metro Access workers. So predominantly our role is to find better ways for people to be included and, you know, gain greater access to the things that you like to do, whether it be arts and culture, sport, recreation, go to university, whatever it might be. And obviously build some socialisation opportunities from there. So over the course of our journey in Metro Access in the last 4 years, we really collaborate with the other Metro Access officers in the Eastern region, which makes up, you know, nearly 800,000 people in the Eastern region. What we've found, and I'll give you some interesting statistics, but we have about 40,000 people in Boroondara with a disability, and 80% of those people have a physical disability, and in some cases a health condition as well. So a lot of the work that we do is about access to the environment, getting in and out of...
Just give those statistics again.
40,000 people in Boroondara with a disability.
Yeah.
80% of those people have a physical disability.
Okay.
And in some cases a health condition as well. Okay. So a number of the work that we do is about accessing the environment, whether it be to buildings, cafes, restaurants, access to information, being involved in things like that. Yeah. So one of the things, and there's some information outside, but I'll just show you some postcards. Like, we've got a scooter user group called SWAT, not like LAPD, but Scooter and Wheelchair Access Team, and that group is about people with mobility impairment, also parents with prams, people with vision impairment and guide dogs and so forth, being involved and advocating for mobility issues around Boroondara. So we feed some of the information that comes out of that back to Llewellyn and the All Aboard campaign. The SWAT group are involved in a lot of community projects, such as they will be asked to give their opinion on access. For example, Highwell is involved in the Baldwin activity plan, which you didn't go into great detail about, but up in Whitehorse Road, that whole area is going to be looked at in terms of the access for everybody, so walkability, trams, bus stops, all that sort of stuff. So our group actually went up and down Whitehorse Road and gave an overview of some of the good, bad and the ugly in that area, and we do that on a number of different community projects, so particularly a lot of the buildings that we own or major projects in the area. Some you might be aware of the Hawthorn Aquatic and Leisure Centre, which is being built. We've had a lot of input into that. We being SWAT, we've had a lot of input into a lot of our pavilions and sporting grounds that get upgraded and things like that. So that group, and they've also been involved in the Doncaster Rail Study as well, which is important. So that's a really good group to be involved in. We meet and we do a lot of demonstrations with the public transport providers. So Metro Trains and Yarra Trams have been really forthcoming in working with our group in terms of how to travel safely and commute safely, and have given demonstrations on Myki and that sort of thing. So we've been able to use, you know, Alamein station, for example, because it's at the end of the line sort of thing, to show people how to get on and off safely, use their tickets properly, and talk about some of the initiatives that Metro Trains might be doing, like Carriage One, for example, that sort of thing. So that's a really good group. So there's some information outside about that. Also, hopefully most of you would have heard about our recharge scheme. Started in 2009. Basically, the recharge scheme is a power point located in any community location where you can recharge your electric wheelchair or scooter. We have 25 of these points in Boroondara now. There's over 550 in Victoria. So if you were going from A to B and detouring off at C somewhere, and you forgot to charge your scooter along the way, you can pop into any place that shows this sticker, and it costs you nothing to plug in your electric scooter or wheelchair or power chair to recharge your battery for free.
But you need your own charger.
You would need your charger, yes. Yeah. So the business or the facility, wherever it is, supplies the power point at their cost, and obviously, you know, the aim of the exercise is to go in and do what normal things you would do if you're going to a cafe or a bookshop or whatever, which is really great. So that's a really successful campaign, and obviously all the buildings that council upgrades because of the DDA requirements and access to premises standards, we have a commitment of putting one of those in each of our buildings, which we have 250 plus of.
And sorry to interrupt, is there a map on the website that shows you all those places?
We have our own map in Boroondara, which you can get my details and I can send to you.
Yeah, cool.
But you can go onto I'll give you the sticker actually, and you can take the sticker and jump onto their website.
Cool.
And it's called the Recharge Finder, I think, from memory. And you can find the 550 locations throughout Metro Victoria, I should say, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And a couple of other projects that we do. We obviously do a lot of work with local businesses and traders around accessibility, you know, retail shops, cafes, etc., restaurants, all that sort of stuff. So we want these places to be more accessible, so we give them some tips along the way. We distributed 5,000 of these to all the retail associations. I think there's 16 retail associations in Boroondara. So they've been passing them on to their members all the time. Particularly, as you would know, living in this area, shops come up with different varieties and types all the time, particularly food premises. But it's been a really effective way for us to work with the traders in, creating more business for themselves by becoming more accessible. We've heard some really great stories of how some of them, particularly around this neighbourhood here, up through the junction here, have been really good in spending lots of money and retrofitting their shops and so forth. We've also heard the bad stories where, businesses continue to use the disabled toilet as a storage room, etc., etc., which just gives us more opportunity to work with those people in terms of what that space is for. We're about to follow this postcard up with a little booklet for the top 10 business types in Boroondara, so like hairdressers, cafes, retail shops, on accessibility for those particular shops. So we're about to print that off. And I would say the businesses in particular have been really forthcoming in and being involved in that. We've done a lot of presentations, particularly through the Ashburton Shopping Centre. I'm not sure if anyone's a regular visitor there, but Llewellyn and Highwell both spoke about the tactile ground surface indicators. We've put in 30,000 tactile indicators in Ashburton in the last year, because obviously there's been major works that have happened in that area, and a lot of the tactiles were actually, because of the refurbishment, we're taking people into hazards and not away from hazards. So we had to lay a lot of new tactiles and that sort of thing. So, and it's an area where there's quite a few aged care facilities and on the hills and things like that. And the major retail outlet, if that's the right thing, that's visited by people in Ashburton is the post office, and it was on the top of the hill with no pedestrian crossing next to it. So there was danger of accident and that sort of thing. So we've been able to Highwell and his team put a new pedestrian crossing in there, which is fantastic. So some of the work that we do through Metro Access, and if you want to be involved in some of the things that we're doing, we have a network that meets 3 times a year, but it's very online because we have a very technical social media savvy municipality here. And I'll point at Roger because he's our social media guru, teaches me everything. So we have a card. I've got a postcard here about how you can keep involved. We have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have a website. where you can post your comments about just about everything. In terms of letting us know about different things that are going on. So Llewellyn might send us information about the Victorian taxi industry update, and we'll put it on our website to give you guys an opportunity to comment on it before we send it back to Llewellyn. So it's not my view, it's our
It's quite
community's view.
interactive.
Yeah, it's very interactive, and you don't have to go and learn a different language. It's all really easy. No, it's honestly so simple to do, it's not funny.
Yeah.
And if you're a bit more social media savvy, you can follow the Twitter leads and all that sort of thing. And Roger's been sitting here this morning sending out tweets about things that Llewellyn's been commenting on to our social media network, which is really good. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes back the other way. But what we are, what we are about here, and we call it BA4A, Boroondara Access for All, is really about Boroondara and the surrounding areas being really accessible to everybody. So access for all ability. So there's a number of ways that you guys can stay involved or be involved. And I know Joan was after some information from me before. So if there's something that you're interested in, whether it be our come and try days that we have for people to try scooters and wheelchairs before they buy them. They're very popular. We have one coming up in July 22, and it's at Q Traffic School down the road. Very popular.
So wheelchairs drive around on the...
And scooters, electric scooters, because we have nearly 1,000 people in Boroondara that use a motorised mobility device.
Wow.
And we have an ageing population. I think I'll use another great stat. 20% of our population are over 80 years old. So there's that whole demographic of people giving back their driver's licences for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And we won't go there.
Sure.
But the come and try days are really successful because a lot of people getting on a scooter for the first time.
Yeah.
I always ask somebody what speed do you think a scooter goes, and what do you think most of the answers are? 40, 50, 60, 70
Well, they
k's.
can, but they're tuned down if they're a government gift, so it's
Mine's 9 kilometres.
So-
I clocked it on
yeah.
one of those signs.
Oh, did you really? Did you really? Well, our SWAT group actually is advocating to drop the speed back because it is actually 10 kilometres, and we're trying to get it. We're going to advocate with Vic Roads and a few other people to get it hopefully reduced to 8.
Incidents, hasn't
Yeah,
over the years.
Yeah, there has been.
How do you get on with people backing out of their driveway?
Oh, you just
And you just
become
gotta
very
be-
alert.
Should be hyper vigilant.
And that's part of the awareness campaign that we have with the community as well. I mean, as I say, we have 1,000 people with a mobility device. And that's a lot of people. So we have to be really vigilant and with the community to let them know about how many people that we have. And we need to educate our scooter users that you are a pedestrian and you need to be wary of other pedestrians along the way as well. And also obey the road rules.
Just so I
which
can
is
know about
important.
statistics, what is the population of Bondi?
At last census, nearly 170,000.
Okay, so
Because it's quite a squashed
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
urban community,
Yeah.
as in the layout of the planning.
Yeah, it is. It is, and both as Hyrule and Llewellyn have both said, the infrastructure is really important.
Yeah.
But that's where we want you guys to be involved in a lot of the things and tell us what is good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah.
And you can do that, as I said, a number of different ways. But we're really proud of some of the achievements we're making along the way, and this is just one of the platforms we'll use to elicit your view. And we've had some people at Baldwin and Ashburton today as well doing the same thing. We were hoping to show some of those questions up there, but we've actually had someone else answering them over there, which is good.